Hi guys, in this video we're going to go over a strategy that I want you to use when you're solving practical problems that have more than one step. So let's get started. Number one, there are 22 kids at the lunch table and they all bought lunch for $2.75 each. Also, half of the kids bought an ice cream cone for $1.15. How much money did they spend altogether? So now that we've read the problem once, I want to go ahead and use my highlighter and highlight any important information in the problem. So there are 22 kids at the lunch table. That seems very important. And they all bought lunch for $2.75 each, meaning all 22 kids paid $2.75 for their lunch that day. It also says that half of the kids bought ice cream. So not all of the 22 kids, but half of those 22 kids got an ice cream cone for $1.15. And then it wants to know how much money did they spend altogether. So before we break this problem down, let's just come up with a gist of the story. What's happening in this word problem? We're going to write a one-sentence summary. So in this word problem, we're talking about all of the students bought lunch and half of those students bought ice cream. Step two, let's take a look at the parts of this story and break it down. So we're going to take each part and then we're going to talk about what each part means. So the first part of my story was talking about how 22 kids bought lunch for $2.75 each. So what does that mean mathematically? If I want to know how much money was spent on lunch, that means I could take 22 and multiply it by $2.75. And when I put that into my calculator, I got $60.50 is the total amount of money the class spent on just the lunches. Now, don't forget, that's just the first part of the story. The next part says also half of the kids bought an ice cream cone for $1.15. So I wrote that underneath the part that half of the kids bought an ice cream cone. So mathematically, what does that mean? Well, how many kids is half of the kids? Well, if there are 22 students total, I can take the number 22 and divide it by 2 to figure out what half of those kids would be. And half of 22 is going to be 11 kids. I also could have taken the number 22 and multiplied it by 1/2, and I would have gotten 11. Now that I know that 11 kids bought ice cream, I'm going to take that number 11 and multiply it by $1.15 because that's the cost of each ice cream cone. And when I did that, I found out that there was $12.65 spent on ice cream alone by those kids in the class. So right now, after steps 1 and 2, I know that the class spent $60.50 on lunch and $12.65 spent on ice cream. Let's go back up and look at the last part one more time. So the last sentence says, how much money did they spend all together? And those words all together hopefully make you think of addition. How much money did we spend all together on lunch and ice cream? So to figure that out, we're going to take $60.50 and $12.65. And when we add that all together, we get $73.15. And that is the total the class spent today. All right, so just to summarize what we just talked about, step one, excuse me, step one, we took the 22 kids in the class and multiplied it by $2.75 to figure out what they spent on lunches. Next, we had to figure out how many kids would be half of the class. So we took the number of students in the class, 22, and divided that number by 2 to figure out how many kids are in half of the class. And we found out that half of the class was 11 kids. Once we knew that 11 kids bought ice cream, we multiplied that by the amount of money each ice cream cone costs and figured out how much we spent on ice cream. And then finally, we added those two amounts together to figure out what we spent total. So the last thing we want to do is reflect. Does our answer make sense? So yeah, our answer is reasonable because it includes the money spent on food, it includes the money spent on ice cream, and we made sure that we figured out how many students were half before we did our work. So yes, our answer considers every part of the problem. Let's take a look at the next problem. It says Skylar earns 50 points for her team and Jaden earns 70 more for the same team. Later, they each lose 20 points. How many points does the team have now? So the first thing we're going to do is summarize the gist of the story, a one-sentence summary of what is happening. So Skylar and Jaden both earned points for their team, but they also both lost points for their team. So that's a summary of what we've got going on. They both gained some points, but they also lost some. Part two, let's take a look at the parts of our problem and what they mean. So the first part of our story tells us that Skylar earned 50 points for the team and Jaden earned 70 more points. Because it says Skylar earned 50 points, I know that that's a positive 50. And then when Jaden earned 70 more, that's another 70. So to figure out how many points they earned together, I did 50 plus 70, and I found out that that was 120 points earned. Let's go back up to the problem and look for part two. The next sentence says, later, they each lose 20 points. So what does that mean? That means Skylar lost 20 points for the team and Jaden also lost 20 points for the team. So when we lose 20 points, we can recognize that with a negative 20, represent that with a negative 20. And negative 20 minus another 20, the points that Skylar lost and Jaden lost, would give us a total of negative 40. But you could also get that answer by doing negative 20 times 2, and that would give you negative 40. So because we now know that Skylar and Jaden lost a total of 40 points, our last step is to answer the question. How many points does the team have now? So if we know they had a positive 120 points and now they lost 40 points, what we're going to do is take 120 and subtract 40 points, and that tells us that their new total is 80 points. And that would be how many points the team has now. So step 3, just assert our claim and write out our solution. So how did we get our answer? Well, we took the number of points earned by Skylar and Jaden and added them together. And then we subtracted the total number of points lost by both Skylar and Jaden, and we found out that the team had a total of 80 points after all of that happened. And when you're working with word problems, the last thing you want to do is always check to make sure your answer is reasonable. Does your answer make sense? Well, yes, my answer makes sense because it included the points that they earned and it included the points that they lost. And I made sure that there was some subtraction in there to show that that is what happened. All right, problem number 3. A scuba diver was swimming 3.5 meters below sea level. A shark was swimming at a depth of 11.5 meters below sea level. What is the difference between the two depths? So before we write out our gist, I'm just going to highlight some important information. So it says the scuba diver was swimming 3.5 meters below sea level. And that word below is very important because it makes me think something different is going to be happening with this 3.5. It says a shark was swimming also at a depth of 11.5 meters below sea level. So I'm going to highlight that as well. Again, the fact that they're saying it's below sea level is very important here because we know that means they are under the water. And then the question says, what is the difference between the two depths? That word difference is key here because that word makes me think of subtraction. So now that we went ahead and highlighted our key information in our problem, let's summarize the gist of our story. So the gist of this story is that a scuba diver and a shark are both swimming underwater, but they're at different depths, right? One of them is further below the water than the other. They're at different spots in the water. So now let's go ahead and take each part of the story, which basically became each sentence, and then break down what that means. So part number 1, a scuba diver was swimming 3.5 meters below sea level. So like I mentioned before, that word below is very important because that means that we are at a depth of negative 3.5 meters. Anytime it says that we are below sea level, we want to represent that with a negative number. The next sentence tells us about the shark's position. It says the shark was swimming 11.5 meters below sea level. Again, since that shark was 11.5 meters below, we know we're going to represent that with a negative 11.5 or negative 11.5, which I got just by typing that into my calculator or knowing that 1/2 is the same thing as 0.5. The third and final part was the question, what is the difference between the two depths? And hopefully when you read that word difference, you knew that they wanted you to subtract. So we're going to take our number -3.5 and we're going to subtract -11.5, and that will tell us that our distance is 8 meters. The difference between where the scuba diver is and the shark is about 8 meters. So that means the scuba diver is about 8 meters above the shark. The shark is about 8 meters below the scuba diver in the water. So now that we figured this out, let's summarize. So our math sentence or equation that helped us solve was -3.5 minus -11.5, and that gave us our difference or distance between the two in the water. And last step is to reflect. So it says, is my solution reasonable? Does it make sense given the whole and all of the parts? So I just go back up here to make sure that my work is reasonable. All right, I represented step 1, represented that second sentence, and then I did my mathematical operation in that third part. So yes, my answer makes sense because you subtract to find the difference between two numbers, and we made sure that we included every part of the story. All right, thanks for watching this video. I hope that you found this strategy of part meaning to be helpful. So when you tackle a word problem on your own, just break it down one part at a time and try to figure out what each part means before you solve.